Close your eyes and take a deep breath. You are home now, and the world outside can wait. Welcome to another episode of Z in History. A group of senators decided that Caesar had grown too powerful. They believed the only way to save the Republic was to kill him. But the murder they planned in the name of freedom destroyed everything they were trying to protect. This is the story of Julius Caesar, a man who was warned to beware a certain day, but walked into the Senate anyway, and the men who killed him, who discovered that removing a tyrant does not always save a republic. The night is still and the streets of Rome are quiet. Settle in and let the story of the Ides of March unfold. Chapter 1. The Crowd in the Street. Julius Caesar returned to Rome after defeating his enemies in a long and bloody civil war. The people filled the streets to welcome him home. They threw flowers and cheered his name and pressed forward to touch his cloak as he passed. He was the most powerful man in the Roman world. The crowd loved him the way crowds love winners, but not everyone was cheering. Some senators watched from the side of the road with their arms crossed and their faces still. They saw the way the people worshipped Caesar. They felt a cold fear settle in their stomachs. A man who was loved this much could do whatever he wanted. He could become a king. He could end the republic that had stood for centuries. Caesar noticed them watching. He nodded in their direction and kept walking. He knew that not everyone was happy about his return. He did not seem concerned. He had won every battle he had ever fought. He had crossed rivers and climbed mountains and defeated armies that were twice the size of his own. A few unhappy senators were not going to keep him awake at night. The procession moved through the Forum and up toward the Temple of Jupiter. Caesar stood at the top of the steps with his arms raised. He accepted the love of a city that had given itself to him completely. The senators who did not cheer stood in the shadows. They began to talk in voices too low for anyone else to hear. Chapter 2. The Warning. A soothsayer stopped Caesar in the street. He told him to beware the Ides of March. Caesar looked at the man and asked him what he meant. The soothsayer said that the 15th of March would be a dangerous day. He said Caesar should not leave his house. Caesar thanked him and walked on. He dismissed the warning the way powerful men always dismiss warnings. He had faced danger before. He had always survived. Cassius was watching the exchange from a nearby doorway. Cassius was a senator who had fought alongside Caesar in the past, but he had grown to resent him. He saw the way Caesar collected power, the way other men collected coins. He believed that the Republic was dying under the weight of one man's ambition. He started talking to other senators who felt the same way. He went to Brutus first. Brutus was a respected senator whose family had a long history of defending the Republic. Cassius told him that Caesar was becoming a tyrant. He said the people were handing him power that should belong to the Senate. He said the time to act was running out. Brutus listened and said nothing. He loved Caesar like a friend, but he loved Rome more. The conspiracy began to form. A handful of men who believed they were saving their country. A handful of men who were about to change the course of history with knives that would not stay clean. Chapter 3. The Conspiracy Forms. Cassius recruited more men to the cause. Casca, Decius, Metellus, Trebonius. They were senators and soldiers and men of influence. They all believed that Caesar had to be stopped. They met at night in houses that were far from the main streets. They spoke in whispers and planned every detail of what they were about to do, but they all agreed on one thing. The conspiracy would not succeed without Brutus. Brutus was respected. Brutus was honest. If Brutus was part of the killing, people would believe that it had been done for the right reasons. Cassius went back to Brutus and pressed him harder. He left fake letters in Brutus's house. They were supposedly from citizens who were begging him to save the Republic. He surrounded Brutus with the idea that the whole city was waiting for him to act. Brutus could not sleep. He paced his room at night, while his wife Portia watched him with worried eyes. He loved Caesar. He owed Caesar for past favors and kindnesses. But he loved the idea of Rome more. The idea of a republic where no single man held all the power. He made his choice. He joined the conspiracy. The group had its leader. Brutus would be the face of the assassination. Cassius would be the hand. The date was set. The Ides of March. Chapter 4. The night before the Ides of March was full of strange omens. A storm raged over Rome, with thunder that shook the walls and lightning that lit up the sky like daylight. Slaves reported seeing men on fire who did not burn. A lion was seen walking through the forum. The statues of the gods seemed to be sweating. Caesar's wife, Calpurnia, dreamed that she was holding his body in her arms, bleeding from 100 wounds. She begged him not to go to the Senate the next day. She told him that the omens were signs. She said the gods were trying to warn him. Caesar was shaken. He had never known his wife to be afraid of anything. Her fear infected him. He decided to stay home. The conspirators heard the news and panicked. Decius, one of the conspirators who was close to Caesar, went to his house. He reinterpreted Calpurnia's dream. He told Caesar that the dream meant something good. He said the Senate was planning to offer him a crown. Staying home would insult the men who wanted to honor him. Caesar changed his mind. He was ambitious. The offer of a crown was too tempting to ignore. He told Calpurnia that he was going. She begged him again. He kissed her forehead and walked out the door. Chapter 5. The Senate Steps. Caesar walked to the Senate on the morning of the Ides of March with a crowd of people around him. The soothsayer was standing on the corner. Caesar saw him and said that the Ides of March had come and nothing bad had happened. The soothsayer replied that the day was not over yet. The senators gathered around Caesar as he approached the building. Some of them were smiling. Some of them were nervous. Trebonius pulled Marc Antony aside. He kept him talking outside the Senate chamber. He made sure that Caesar's most loyal ally would not be present. When the knives came out, Caesar entered the chamber and sat in his chair. The conspirators moved into positions around him. They pretended to have petitions and requests. Metellus knelt in front of Caesar and asked him to recall his brother from exile. Caesar refused. The other conspirators joined in the request, pressing closer. Caesar stood up to tell them to stop. That was the signal. Casca struck first. He drew his dagger and slashed at Caesar's neck. Caesar turned and grabbed Casca's arm. He shouted at him. Then the others moved in. They pulled their blades and drove them into Caesar's body from every direction. Chapter 6. The Blood on the Floor. Caesar fought back at first. He tried to push them away. He tried to reach the door. Then he saw Brutus among the faces. Brutus, his friend. Brutus, the man he had trusted like a son. Caesar stopped fighting. He pulled his robe over his head and fell to the floor. He fell at the base of the statue of Pompey. Pompey was the man he had defeated in the civil war that had brought him to power. The senators stood over his body with their daggers dripping blood. They shouted that freedom was restored. The tyrant was dead. Rome was saved. They ran through the streets calling for celebration. But the people did not celebrate. They closed their windows and locked their doors. They did not know what to think. The body of Caesar lay on the Senate floor. It was abandoned by the men who had killed him and the men who had loved him. A servant eventually came and covered it with a cloth. The great man was gone. The men who had killed him were about to discover something. Removing a leader is not the same as fixing a country. Chapter 7. The Speech in the Forum. Brutus stood before the crowd in the Forum. He explained why Caesar had to die. He spoke calmly and with dignity. He said that he loved Caesar, but that he loved Rome more. He said that Caesar was ambitious and that ambition would have destroyed the Republic. The crowd listened and nodded. They seemed to accept his explanation. Then Marc Antony took the stage. He had been given permission to speak as long as he did not blame the conspirators. He kept his word. He did not blame them. Instead, he held up Caesar's blood-stained robe. He told the crowd about the things Caesar had done for Rome, the battles he had won, the laws he had passed, the money he had put in the treasury. He pointed to the tear in the robe where Brutus's knife had gone in. He reminded the crowd that Brutus had been Caesar's friend. The crowd began to murmur. Antony kept talking. He let the weight of every word sink in. By the time he was finished, the crowd was ready to tear the conspirators apart with their bare hands. Brutus and Cassius watched from a distance as the mob turned violent. They had won the argument. They had lost the crowd. They fled Rome that night. They knew their window of control had closed as quickly as it had opened. Chapter 8. The City in Flames. The mob spread through the streets of Rome. They burned houses and attacked anyone connected to the conspiracy. The poet Cinna was killed because the crowd thought his name was Cinna. The conspirator, he was an entirely different person. The violence was random and senseless and impossible to stop. The conspirators scattered. Brutus and Cassius fled to the eastern provinces. There they could raise armies and prepare for the war that was coming. The remaining senators tried to restore order, but the city was beyond their control. Antony took charge with Octavius, Caesar's adopted son. The two of them formed an alliance. It would soon turn into a hunt for every man who had raised a hand against Caesar. The republic that Brutus had tried to save was gone. In its place was a power vacuum. Power vacuums are always filled by the people who are willing to do the most brutal things to claim them. Rome was about to enter a new war. This war would be fought between Romans against Romans. There was no clear enemy except each other. Chapter 9. The Ghost. Brutus sat in his tent the night before the battle. He could not sleep. The weight of what he had done pressed down on him like a physical thing. He had killed a friend. He had started a war. He had watched his country tear itself apart because of a choice he had made in the name of freedom. The tent flap moved. A figure stood in the entrance. Brutus recognized it immediately. It was Caesar, not a man made of flesh and blood, but a ghost, pale and silent and carrying the wounds of the assassination. The ghost spoke. It said that it would see Brutus at Philippi. Then it faded into the darkness. Brutus sat alone with the echo of those words. He knew now that he was not going to survive this war. The ghost had been sent to tell him that the debt was coming due. There was no way to avoid payment. He did not call for his guards. He did not run. He sat in his chair and waited for the morning. He knew that the morning would bring the battle that would decide everything. Chapter 10. The Battle of Philippi. The armies met at Philippi in northern Greece. Brutus commanded one wing, Cassius commanded the other. Opposite them stood Antony and Octavius, the men who had sworn to avenge Caesar's death. The field was flat and the lines were long. The morning sun glinted off the armor of thousands of men who were about to kill each other. Brutus attacked first. His soldiers broke through the enemy lines. For a moment, it looked like they might win. But Cassius's wing was pushed back. Cassius could not see what was happening on Brutus's side. He thought the battle was lost. He ordered his servant to hold his sword. He ran onto it, Cassius, died believing that his cause had failed. The battle was not over, but Cassius was. Brutus wept when he heard the news. Cassius had been difficult and stubborn and sometimes wrong, but he had been a friend. Now he was gone, killed by his own hand on a field full of strangers. Chapter 11. The Second Battle. The second battle came 2 weeks later. Brutus's army was smaller now. They were tired and demoralized by the loss of Cassius. The soldiers fought well, but they were outnumbered and outflanked. Brutus watched his lines crumble. He knew that the end was coming. He retreated to a hill with a handful of his closest men. He asked them to hold his sword while he ran onto it, the same way Cassius had done. They refused. They could not watch their general die. Brutus pressed them. One by one, they turned away. Finally, a man named Strato agreed. He held the sword and turned his face. Brutus ran onto the blade and fell to the ground. He spoke a few words about Caesar and about the Republic and about the choices that had led him to this hill. Then he was quiet. Antony found the body later. He stood over Brutus and said that he had been the noblest Roman of them all. He said the other conspirators had killed Caesar out of envy and ambition, but Brutus had done it because he believed it was right. It was a generous thing to say about a man who had been his enemy. Chapter 12. The noblest Roman. The war was over. Antony and Octavius divided the Roman world between them. The republic that Brutus had died to protect was buried under the weight of a new empire. Octavius would become Augustus, the first Roman emperor. The Senate that had once ruled the world became a room full of men who nodded at whatever the emperor said. The dream of the Republic died on the hill at Philippi with Brutus and Cassius. The men who had killed Caesar to save Rome had ended up destroying it instead. The city that had once been the center of the free world was now the property of a single man who had won the last battle. Caesar's ghost did not appear again. It did not need to. The revenge was complete. The cost had been paid by everyone who had been part of the story. The Ides of March had come and gone. The world had not ended. It had simply changed, the way it always does when men decide that the only way to fix a broken system is to break it further.